Meus cumprimentos ao Frederico Mathevet e ao professor Mário Videira. É um prazer poder estar iniciando o 4º Simpósio Internacional de Filosofia e Estética da Música, com a temática Estéticas e Experiências Sonoras. Trata-se de uma iniciativa que reúne artistas, professores e pesquisadores em diferentes áreas, passando pela música, pelas artes visuais, estética, filosofia e história, na busca de aprofundar questões que nos ajudem a ampliar, pensar e discutir problemas relacionados às estéticas que se nos apresentam e às questões sonoras que se nos apresentam. Hoje temos, abrindo esse evento, a presença do professor Frederic Mathevet e do professor Mário Videira, que conduzirá o debate. O professor Mário Videira é professor livre-docente em estética musical na Escola de Comunicação e Artes da USP. O professor Frederic Mathevet, artista sonoro, artista visual e pesquisador em artes, na Paris Sorbonne 2. Eu passo então a palavra ao professor Mário para a condução.
Muito obrigado, professor Raimundo. Boa tarde a todos e a todas. Boa tarde, professor Frederic. É um prazer participar novamente do CEFIM 2023. E antes de mais nada, eu gostaria de agradecer aos organizadores desse evento, especialmente o professor Raimundo, né, e a sua equipe, pelo trabalho árduo, né, pela dedicação na organização desse evento. E, sem dúvida, né, sem toda essa dedicação, esse evento, que já é um sucesso há vários anos, não teria sido possível, né? E nós estamos muito honrados hoje em receber o Dr. Frederic Mathevet como conferencista hoje, embora nós não possamos nos reunir pessoalmente. Eu acredito que esse evento transmitido por YouTube permitirá uma participação ainda maior de todos aqueles que estão nos assistindo neste momento. Então, como o professor Raimundo falou, o professor Frederic Mathevet é doutor em artes, tem uma larga produção de artigos, publicou livros sobre artes visuais, inúmeras exposições em Paris, Montreuil, Toulouse, Londres, né? Além de ter feito diversos concertos multimídia, né? E hoje a fala do professor Frederic Mathevet tem como título Extended Partitions and Plastic Modalities of Writing of Sound and Music. E acredito que vai ser uma fala muito informativa, muito provocativa também. E nós pedimos a todos, né, que após a fala do professor Frederic, que tenham questões, que possam então colocá-las no chat, e se o tempo assim permitir, nós vamos então interagir com o professor logo após a conferência. Então, sem mais delongas, gostaria de dar as boas-vindas ao professor Frederic Mathevet. Professeur, bienvenue. Et
merci. Before starting, I warmly thank all your team for this invitation. I apologize in advance for my English and for the reading that I will do of my text. I'm going to do my best to make it as smooth as possible. I will start with a foreword to present my research work in art with art. My artistic work is cosmopolitan, like Isabel Stengers write this. It questions all the sensitive and symbolic forms that bear witness to our mediation. That is to say, how a given collective articulates the world, how to think about living together, and thereby how to live and mentalize the limit between other, human and non-human, and oneself. Willingly relying on an ontogenesis inherited from ontological term represented by Latour, Descola, Ingold, Kohn, my artistic productions are equipraxes, moments of semiotic panics where we put back on the seat the living semiotic chains that make our world. And they made the choice of a label, mutable and mobile plasticity, which crosses all beings and which thinks semiosis in its image. So my workshop is necessarily interdisciplinary, even ultra-disciplinary. That is to say, beyond the easy hashtag that classify, erect walls, and establish easy dichotomy inherited from our Western naturalist culture. On the contrary, my practice, would reconnect with the formless. It downgrades, it perpetually undermines the stability of norms. As a result, my practice is a series of hybrid arrangement which mixes text, sound, object, image, and which desperately seeks to make manifest the links, the stitch of this assembly and the spatiotemporal niches which manifest the coordinates of a collective on the horizon, cosmos, socius, intime, by which it is determined. But at the same time, what makes work nomadic becomes a centrifugal space of metamorphoses, confrontations, and contaminations. Crossbreeding and rhapsody are the privileged poetic gesture of my studio, auscultating our great living cluster. As such, my studio is the space of a perpetual excavation of the world that surrounds me. Plasticity comes at first. Plasticity makes the form nomadic and sets in perpetual motion. A so-called work of art is nothing more than a stop. A work is a temporarily frozen movement. And
Professeur Mathevet,
yes.
pardon, il y a un problème, il semble, avec l'image, il semble que nous devrons recommencer, s'il vous plaît. Je suis désolé, mais il semble que les auditeurs ne voient pas l'image de slide.
Ele parou o screen dele lá, Mário, de alguma forma.
Est-ce qu'on peut essayer de recommencer, de partager de nouveau votre image de les slides?
Bien sûr.
Et...
Alors, ça marchait très bien il y a 2 minutes.
Oui, ce sont les choses que...
Alors...
Aqui para mim nem a câmera dele tá aparecendo, talvez ele tenha que sair e entrar de novo da reunião, porque antes estava normal, não entendi exatamente o que aconteceu.
Il semble que votre caméra et votre image n'apprête pas pour nous. Je crois que peut-être sortir de la réunion et puis rentrer si vous pouvez.
Bien sûr.
Oui.
Donc, je sors et je reviens.
Oui.
À tout de suite.
À tout de suite. Bom, então o professor vai entrar e sair novamente para nós tentarmos corrigir esse problema com a transmissão dos slides, né, e das imagens que não estavam funcionando. Então, peço desculpas a todos e em breve nós vamos, então, conseguir transmitir normalmente a palestra do professor Frederic Mathevet. Maintenant, je crois que je vous vois.
Oui, moi je me vois 2 fois, mais c'est
Deux
pas
fois?
grave. Non, oui, mais avec une image fermée. Enfin, éteinte. Donc je vais relancer le partage.
OK.
Dites-moi si ça fonctionne.
Oui, maintenant on voit la présentation. Oui,
OK.
ça marche maintenant. Donc, on recommence. Merci, professeur.
Je recommence depuis le début. Hein.
Oui, merci, merci.
I will start with a foreword to present my research work in art and with art. My artistic work is cosmopolitan, like Isabel Stengers says. It questions all the sensitive and symbolic forms that bear witness to our mondiation, worldization, I suppose in English. That is to say, how a given collective articulates the world, how to think about living together, and thereby how to live and mentalize the limit between others, human and non-humans, and oneself. Willingly relying on an ontogenesis inherited from the ontological term represented by Latour, Descola, Ingold, Kohn. My artistic production are ecopraxis, moment of semiotic panics, where we put back on the site the living semiotic chains that make our world. In the made the choice of a label, mutable and mobile plasticity, which crosses all beings and which thinks semiosis in its image. So my workshop is necessarily interdisciplinary. That is to say, beyond the easy hashtag that classify, erect walls, and establish easy dichotomy inherited from a Western naturalist culture. On the contrary, my practice would reconnect with the formless. It downgrades, it perpetually undermines the stability of the noun. As a result, my practice is a series of hybrid arrangements which mixes text, sound, object, image, and which desperately seeks to make manifest the links, the stitches of these assemblies, and the spatio-temporal niches which manifest the coordinates of our collective on the horizon, cosmos, socius, intime, by which it is determined. But at the same time, what make work, nomadic, become a centrifugal space of metamorphosis, confrontations, and contaminations. Crossbreeding and rhapsody are the privileged poetic gestures of my studio, auscultating our great living cluster. As such, my studio is the space of a perpetual excavation of the worlds that surround me. Plasticity comes at first. Plasticity makes the form nomadic and set in perpetual motion. A so-called work of art is nothing more than a stop. A work is a temporarily frozen movement, and a work is death fragile. The notion of giving, receiving, destroying is inherent to a plastic conception of the plastic semiotic. You can see this on the slide. It makes possible to create sensitive clusters, unstable and fragile precipitates that simultaneously influence the artist, the listeners, and the milieu in which these precipitations take place. Visual artists open to any polymorphism, to any mutability. I define myself as a handyman, untangling media whether digital, pictorial, or sound, like the vector of an intractable plastic language. In other words, which resists learning scenes and constantly put the arbitrariness and inequality of the signs that construct the real back on the operating table. Wandering music, wild installations, but which respect their environment, drawings, photographs, painting and writing, in tune with the present as it falls, questions the collective memory, identity, and global standardization promoted by a market low globalizing and all the democracies in force are living. My productions want to put back on the construction seat the mode of habitability of the worlds and makes the hypothesis of another possible sensible world. I work starting from a threshold in the transition between the visual and sound arts. It is on this threshold that I auscultate the metis links, like Laplantine defined, which are so many stitches, places of transformation, contamination, and confrontation. The anthropologist François Laplantine defines these metis links as follows. Miscegenation is the though and first of all an experience of disappropriation, of the absence of what one has left, and the uncertainty of what will spring from the encounter. The metis condition is the most often painful condition. We walk away from what we were, we let go of what we had. Drawing the logical thread of these metis links, I began to define their modalities. It was a question of continuing to write music with plasticity and with rigor. So I prefer to use the term conduction to describe the motility at work. The following reference table takes account of this lability by scrutinizing the temporary fixation, the moment of passage. The question of Tim Ingold that I deliver to you on this slide is the ultimate problematic of plasticity. In a world of fluid processes, how can emergent forms be produced to last? The notion of conduction will allow me to locate the points of passages, the transfer of energy at work in music and visual art. I spot 4 types of conduction that I will detail here. Conduction is a physics term that refers to the passing of heat energy from one particle to another. By extension, the term designates the property of materials to transmit energy. You can see Namyoon Paik will explain this concept. First, we can speak about direct physical conduction. Direct conduction concerns situations where a material transforms itself, that is to say, when a material changes state, as well as situations where a material physically spreads into another, like the weather box of Hans Ack, represented on this slide. Music on a long thin wire is a sound and installation piece conceived in 1977. A single piano wire is stretched between bridges at either end. Both ends of the wire are connected to an amplifier, driving the wire with a sine wave oscillator. A horseshoe magnet is placed around the wire. When the wire is electrified, its current interacts with the magnetic field, and the vibration are picked up by a microphone connected to the bridge. This is the closest example of direct physical conduction that I have found, but the electrical energy necessary to set the cord in motion and its amplification makes this piece a good example for an indirect conduction. The indirect physical conduction refers to situations where the transformation of a material are significant consequences on another material. For another example, I choose Torsion by Giovanni Anselmo. But we can say that all instrumental practices are indirect physical conduction, like these pieces of George Brecht, incidental music. Another conduction possible is the scripted figural conduction of simple materials. Scripted is the traduction of French scénarisé. I think I'm not sure it's the good translation. So scripted figural conduction of simple materials. The figural conduction of scripted materials can be called simple when the material is chosen for the scenario, the script, that inhabits it. Here, the marble and the salad, chosen by Giovanni Anselmo in Senza Titolo Struttura che Mangia in 1968. An example in music of scripted figural conduction was this beautiful picture of Cage, which play with Alvin Lucier. To make Lucier's brain wave audible, 2 electrodes were first placed on each side of his head. The signals generated from this electrode were then fed to an amplifier through a mixing desk and finally activating a selection of snare drum and cymbals that were connected to loudspeakers. The performance came to be Lucier's masterpiece, the first of its kind at the time, and a reminder that to look to the future, sometime we must consult the past. In my opinion, an example of conduction of simple scripted material, brainwaves, though, are summoned as unequivocally scripted material. But the conduction can use the complex material. So another type of conduction is the scripted figural conduction of complex material. The figural conduction is said to be complex when the chosen material is inseparable from its textualization and narrative, social use, historical relationships, function, relationships to the body. It carries with it all the worldliness of a given collective. So I choose the ready-made of Marcel Duchamp, Fontaine, for explain this this conduction. For waterwork, Cage rounded up a variety of instruments, all to do with water, a bass tube, a pitcher, ice cube in a mixer, and the unconventional symphony they produce culminate in mixing of a drink, the sipping of which the composition dictates about 2.5 minutes in. It's a performance that Cage make for a TV show. The notion of conduction, which concerns all the materials called upon in the creation of a work, must be coupled with the notion of procème. There is no English for translation. Process is not really the good traduction. It is more interested in gesture and processes, but the procème would be the smallest remarkable unit of process in the description of the work that contributes to the production of meaning. I choose Jackson Pollock for this concept. We can consider that there are two types of process. A first type called an algorithmic process, which delegates to the coding and the protocol the formatting of the work, and so-called plastic processes, which we will to consider to DI and involving simple physical action like bending, cutting, tearing, walking. On this slide, you can see an example of an algorithmic process. This is a score for a wall drawing by Sol Lewitt. The drawing to be made unfolds according to combinatorial rules of color and form. An example here, an example of a plastic process, procème, walking. By moving this concept to the side of the composition of sound and music, it is very easy to see that the algorithmic processes will apply to all the rules of Western composition, for example. On the other hand, it is more difficult to perceive the plastic processes in the composition. But there are some possible examples on the side of rock, the practice of hip-hop, improvisation in free jazz, etc. I choose a wonderful picture of Jimi Hendrix and his guitar in fire. It is therefore from these conceptual tools that I deploy my sound, musical and visual composition. It is therefore from these conceptual tools that I deploy, it's as if there were two histories of the music that had unfolded from the music recorded on a medium. One that, though, of the sound object as a closed object, the closed groove of the concrete music, represented by Pierre Schaeffer on the left of the slide. The other, represented by the scratch, by the practice of the scratch and the plastic manipulation of the vinyl, imaging an open, freed sound object, an open groove, capable of transformation, represented here by Gigi Kullerk, which invent the scratch. It became the logic that there were more place and time-dependent, temporary and labile sound objects, rather than fixed sound object related to the studio listening alone. The modality of appearance of this sound object would lead me to rethink the composition of sound and music. The table opposite shows the mode of appearance of this sound object according to two saliences, figural and experiential. Figural, here we meet this concept with the conduction and the scripted conduction. Figural designates the putting into text of the sensible, lived or supposed. Experiential means the immediate sensible experience of the sound object, live or supposed. we can see that the sound object of concrete music has given way to three modes of appearance of sound object, which are three different listening modes. Disembodied sound object on the top of the table is the open closed groove of Pierre Schaeffer, is the sound object of the studio. It's the sound object of the acousmatic listening. But sound objects appear in other reality. Gesture sound object, a result of a process for gesture in the sound body, and circumstantial sound object. It's an error here, depending on the issue, circumstance, sit, and moment. The plastic modality of the composition of sound and music are therefore based on conductions, direct, indirect, and figural. We say scripted in our description. Process, algorithmic, and or plastic, and modality of appearance of the sound object, disembodied, of gesture, circumstantial. The score, the writing of the music, is going to be done from all of this data, but this plasticity will have many consequences on the way of thinking about the score itself. It is on this point that I would like to end before moving on the case studies. From the traditional point of view of notation, the codified writing is brought to be transliterated into acoustic reality. Its place is the desk. Air, only moment of visibility, turn air around. The score, as an object, does not intervene in the production of meaning at the time of execution. We call this score score transparent score. This equation is the situation zero present the classic form of the link between the score and the performance. The score is here. The interpret are here, and he reading the score for muscle energy on somebody for acoustic reality in a moment A and moment A prime simultané. The acoustic reality is the privileged aesthetic part, and the acoustic space is this ensemble. We could play with this first equation. For example, when the partition say no muscle energy, zero. It's the example of 433 of silence when John Cage, note that for the no interpretation, the muscular energy equal to zero is theatricalized, dramatized. Moreover, this 433 of silence will be meaningless if Cage did not play the scenario inherent of in the form of the classical concept. Another game was the first equation. Name your pick, one for violin solo. During 5 minutes of waiting and tension, Peck very slowly lifts a violin, then smashes it with one blow on the table. At the same time, the lights go out in the auditorium. the situation with the sound body and the muscle energy is dramatized, and the privileged aesthetic part is this moment. We could imagine another situation. It is the sound body that can be scripted and become the privileged aesthetic part, as in this piece, by Lamonte-Young, composition 1916, number 5. Turn a butterfly or any number of butterflies loose in the performance area. When the composition is over, be sure to allow the butterfly to fly away outside. The composition may be any length, but if an unlimited amount of time is available, the doors and windows may be opened before the butterfly is turned loose, and the composition may be considered finished when the butterfly flies away. In this composition, it's the sound body which dramatized. This equation represents a typical case of indirect conduction, where the initial energy is transferred to another object before exiting the sound body, which will produce the sound. We saw an example of this with George Brecht pieces, incidental music. He stacks cubes on the wire of a piano until they collapse. I think about Giorgi Ligeti and the Poème symphonique. Poème symphonique requires 100 metronomes, preferably in the shape of a pyramid, a conductor and 10 performers. Each of the metronomes at a complete stop is placed on the stage, reassembled and adjusted to a certain frequency. When they are all back up, the conductor decides on a silence of 2 to 6 minutes. Then, at his signal, all metronomes are triggered as simultaneously as possible. The performers leave the room as the metronome beat time. They stop one after the other and let us perceive more and more clearly the periodicity of the beats. Then only a few beats, they are the ones that have been set to the slowest speeds. The piece ends after the last metronome beats on its own for some time, followed by a silence. The performer then returns to the stage to salute. In total, the piece lasts a little less than 20 minutes. Then, the partition envisaged from plasticity leads us to propose specific partition. The score has emancipated itself from the desk. It is a visible object, just as important as the acoustic reality. It is an integral part of the meaning of the work. It can be visual, audio, or audiovisual, and it is composed with the sound it can produce, the gestures it will engage. This is only a possible example of the specific partition on this slide, which case study will help you understand better. I insist when the score is a specific score and the privileged aesthetic part are the ensemble of the dispositif. Now I want to present example of my own practice, and I commence by case study French of the boat. We can see the score on the screen. Fresh off the boat is a graphic score for wood and paper that questions Mediterranean migratory movements, current and past. It is also linked to autobiographical elements. On a sewing paper, 3 elements are superimposed. An wood, for which we will choose a Syrian toning. This wood is drawn to scale 1. It's the real tie of the wood. Then the sky map of January 24, 1952 at 12 p.m. visible from geographical coordinates of the day and place of my father's birth, whose story is also linked to the migratory history of France. Finally, the map of the Mediterranean, on which I have noted only number, those of dead migrants identified by UNITAID for Intercultural Action and geolocated on the outskirts or in the Schengen area. It is the mythological story of the wood, the filial relationship that I described, which allow this encounter. Lamech, sixth grandson of Adam, buried hung the body of his dead son on a tree. Staying by her side, he cried and implored the sky. Then the drying body of the son and the wood of the tree became one. And the father continued to sing his distress by addressing the stars, with this new instrument made of body, probably stretched nerves and guts, and wood whose shape was inspired by the bleached carcass of the deceased. This drawing is then cut out to be laid. This drawing is then cut out to be laid out so that an instrumentalist can read it. The square of the sewing paper become a measure of time once again. The superposition acts here as a scripted conduction, which engages in the interpretation device to make the score visible to the public. The drawing also retains all traces of its creation. The game indications are also pasted there, of which here are some extract necessary for the understanding of this graphic score. The performer takes place for a restricted audience. Each person should be able to hear the sound, which should be subtle, and see both the score and the action of the performer. The audience is distributed around the table. Read the pages one after the other. On each page, the squares are read one after the other in the traditional Western reading direction, left to right, top to bottom. Each black trace belonging to the sky chart reading is interpreted as an action to be produced either on the instrument or outside the instrument. On the instrument, the stars are played at the exact place where they are on the soundboard or on the string according to the playing indication indicated. Outside the instrument, if the stars are outside the representation of the hood, the sound action to be produced is done on a sheet of paper borrowed from the photocopy peel prepared as specified in the performance part. The actions are done in the order of the action necessary for the realization of a paperboard and according to the rhythm proposed by the layout of the star chart of the sky map. His action usually shown as follows: paper manipulation, pick up, turn over, open, fold the paper. Mark the folder with the fingernail on the table. When a boat is finished, the performer sweeps it up and knock it to the ground. This gesture does not count as an action. It is to the interpreter's discretion. In this form of métis writing, it is important to make visible the score, which is no longer quite this neutral object placed on a desk. Its visibility contributes to the meaning of the work. In the same way, all the paperboards, which the performer will produce as a sound element, are also strong symbolic elements in the production of meaning in the piece. This supposed, during the work of composition, to open the conductions not only to the summoned sound objects, but to the objects, things, to the gesture, and to the setting in place of the piece being written. The table already mentioned above opens up to all the human and non-human present during the interpretation. Fresh of the boat is indeed a métis piece between the concert and the performance. Its interpretation lasts about 1 hour and 10 minutes. It is also an installation that takes shape during the interpretation. Listeners are necessary spectators if they want to grasp the meaning of the play. Its creation took place on Saint-Étienne, performed by the great artist Bertrand Chavarial. And another case study, decreasing study for music box, 432 symbolic representation of 3 on 3990 mètres carrés. Hardwoods, this is the generic name given to the vegetation of the land that is being prepared to be deeply transformed, to which correspond a scene to facilitate the reading of a map. Here, a perfectly round, empty, null, 0. However, I am surprised when I found this execution project map for the A85 motorway, entrusted by an engineer, to see how carefully said hardwoods are represented. On for 1000 scale map, the size of the representation varies. The spacing seems to be correspond to the real distance. I then imagine this pleasant wooded area crossed by the CR8, and I see and hear these same hardwoods that are going to be scrapped to make way for a highway. I think of Ballard, of Crash. The highway is like the car, the symbol of a society that has imagined itself as modern. It is today the symptom of a capitalism at the end of its course that the new makes bitter. So I pierce same fibule, incrusting an absence to paradoxically reveal their presence. The paper will then be used as music paper for a music box. I calculate each of my gesture as a minimum energy, no more. I economize. Little pocket symphony that reminds me of all the nomadic musical experiences that I carried out in the field, respecting the environment that saw them born, whistling, snapping my fingers, tapping on the little metal box that preciously preserves the licorice candies that I like. My work takes on the appearance of an idiotic aesthetic or an aesthetic of idiocy. I want now talk about a project, working project named I Kiss You, Take Care of Yourself. This project is made with a melody called protéodie. I explain what it's protéodie. The protein chain involved in the process of our breathing emits a series of frequencies that can be transposed into a musical note. At least that is the theory of protéodie. This chain, recalculated so that it is not contained with the approximations of our temperate system, is rewritten on a precarious adhesive tape. Symbolically, it is the writing of the end of the breath, of the last sigh, which come to repair the object from our interest. The whole, organized according to the initial protéodie, is a score for voice. It is a composition from complex scripted conduction, an attempt at symmetrical anthropology to remind us of all that exists in this object, which adhere in all their parents to the social body. They attach themselves to the social and they make it partly. For this work in progress, I also propose to intervene directly at your home to repair your broken object. I provide with the repaired object a series of postcards of the object with its methods of interpretation. The score are on the postcard. I would now like to talk about a suite of photographic sheet music for piano called Filigree and Shadow. All photographs include a transparent card. We can see here the transparent card. This transparent card on which there is the representation of a piano keyboard. This might, like a tablature, will allow the interpretation of each photograph. Each image gives indications and modalities of games on the keyboards, on and in the piano, and the surrounding space. The interpreter must make an accurate reading of each photograph. Once he has interpreted a photograph, he will take care of storing it again on the ground, hanging it on the wall or against each other, balancing on the edge of the piano or in the space invested. I need to describe how the interpreter can read a photograph. The card. An image has a card representing a keyboard fragment and a space in which this map is installed. Compared to the interpreter's reading of the image, the card may correspond to A section of the keyboard. The information that can be read can be reduced to the portion of the keyboard shown. Its position in the image may be interpreted as a register indication. For example, If it's very left or very low, the interpreter can play in the extreme low of the keyboard. On the other hand, if the chord is placed in the upper part of the image or on the far right, the performer may choose to play in the higher part of the keyboard instead. Or the chord may correspond to the entire keyboard. Transparency and reflection. Transparency and highlights key or set of keys shown on the map. Traces of the underside, scratches, top marks, reflection, and other shadow are all information to interpret. The interpreter will take care to play exhaustively all that be perceived on each card. He can repeat as many times as he wants, wherever he sees fit. Hesitation, uncertainties, and other harshness can be part of the execution. A chord is played on the keyboard and the keys, but also on all the mechanisms that participates in the production of the sound, encodes, strings, pedals. A map not only gives note to play, but induces game modes, cluster, glissandi, pinches, keystroke, small taps, etc. We can see in French, sorry, on this slide what is the how we read the chord on all the mechanisms that participate in the production of a sound. For the rest of the photograph, the score say that let the chord contrast with the rest of the image. Then all that is in the image, but out of the field of the chord, is interpreted outside the keyboard, lead, desk, soundboard, piece of furniture, pedal as sound body, to the space around the piano. It is not forbidden to play with the stage, if there is one, or the wall of the surrounding space. The chord has a porosity relationship with the rest of the image. Therefore, events of the image can also be played on the keyboard, keys, and all the mechanism of sound productions, dowels, strings, etc. The interpreter will be attentive to the textures represented, which will guide him in the modes of production of the sound to be chosen: the finger, the arms, the forearms, the fat of the fingers, the nails, or a mallet, etc. And the lines that structure the photographs that will help him choose the sound event to produce: punctual, repeated, rhythmic, random. In general, the interpreter is free and relies on what the image evokes or expresses. If he sets himself a rule, he will take care to keep it on all the photographs he has chosen to interpret. I put a slide. We represent the stage with photograph all around the piano. For the duration, the shots of the photographs and the circulation of the gaze induced by the composition will be used by the performer to organize the sound events to be produced, the duration of interpretation of the image, and the different tempo he chooses. The plans of the image can organize the interpretation of each image. The sound actions to be produced can follow one another in the same way as the foreground, the second shot, up to the background. You can also choose to start with the background and finish with the foreground. The circulation of the gaze induced by the composition of the image will also give indication in the way of structuring the interpretation. A linear composition will promote a reading of the image from right to left and or from top to bottom. A circular composition may initiate repetition in the sound action to be produced. The pianist is free of the duration of the sound interpretation of each photograph. However, it will be sensitive to account for the immediacy of the reading of the image. These are like haiku, who engage a relatively short overall duration of interpretation. The nuances are left to the free interpretation of the musician. The image evokes spaces and places, expresses particular atmospheres and acoustic. All of this can be translated into intensity. Texture and color can also guide the musician in choosing his palette of shade. Thank you for your attention. I finish my presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frederic Mathevet, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. We now have the opportunity for questions from the audience. So those who are watching us via YouTube can feel free to share their thoughts and questions in the chat box. So, muito obrigado, professor Frederic Mathevet, por compartilhar essa conferência conosco. E aqueles que estão nos assistindo por YouTube, tem então a possibilidade de colocar questões, compartilhar através do nosso chat. Eu vou dar uma olhada aqui se tem questões.
Eu acho, Mário, que até que venham as questões, eu gostaria de fazer alguns comentários que você poderia apresentar ao professor Frederic.
Vou tentar.
Agradeço também ao Frederic pela apresentação, muito instigante, que nos coloca justamente nessa fronteira de relações entre o universo das artes plásticas e o universo sonoro e musical. E eu gostaria, Mário, que você perguntasse para ele como se dão os processos de escolha que conduzem os processos criativos dele nessa relação entre as plasticidades e todos os universos sonoros, ou seja, em relação às materialidades, escolhas e tomadas de decisões nas composições.
Como se dão os processos de escolha que conduzem os processos criativos dele e tomadas de decisão?
Considerando todas as materialidades entre o sonoro, e o visual e plástico.
Ok. Bon, je vais essayer de faire la question de professeur Raimundo en français, peut-être c'est mieux. Et vous pouvez répondre en anglais si vous voulez. Et bon, il a remercié pour votre conférence et qui nous a fait réfléchir sur cette frontière de relation entre l'univers des arts plastiques et la musique. Et il voudrait vous demander comment ça se fait le processus de choix, votre processus de choix qui conduit dans votre prise de décision créative en considérant les différentes matérialités. Et ça, c'est la matérialité sonore, la matérialité visuelle, les arts plastiques, c'est ça. Et donc, si vous pouvez commenter votre processus créatif en général, comment ça se donne chez vous.
So I think I got to have a response in English, but I'm not sure it's very easy for me. I don't want. I didn't want to choose between visual art and sound art, well, music. So my question was how in my studio and my workshop, how all the materials, visual and sound, could be together in a process of composition, but visual composition and music composition. So the conduction, the concept of conduction me permettait with the conduction, it is possible for me to think about the material for the visual art, think the material as energy, and translate more simple the concept in music. The sound is energy. The sound is a process of a gesture or is a fluid. It's electricity or electricity is energy. But in marble or in the wood, in the paper, this energy is not enough. On le voit pas tout de suite, quoi. Je sais pas si this. So in my process, I imagine and I make a table very with big rigor for these materials, for think the materiality, and the other concept for me very important was the notion of prosem. We allow transmission in music from visual art. All the question of little process, we became art. Je ne sais pas si ça répond un peu à la question, pas du tout.
Merci, professeur Mathevet. Je crois que sur YouTube, il n'y a pas de questions pour ce moment. Et donc, peut-être on pourrait finir ici. So, I want to express my gratitude to our keynote speaker, once again, Dr. Frederic Mathevet, for sharing his thought-provoking conference with us, his expertise. And I also would like to thank Dr. Raimundo Rajovac. And now in Portuguese, muito obrigado mais uma vez, professor Frederic Mathevet, pela conferência, por compartilhar a sua expertise conosco. Gostaria de agradecer novamente ao professor Raimundo Rajovac e toda a sua equipe pela organização desse evento. E nesse momento que a gente, então, encaminha essa primeira conferência para o encerramento, gostaria de lembrar a todos e a todas que nós ainda teremos muitas conferências nesse evento, sessões de comunicações, palestras. Por exemplo, hoje à noite, às 19 horas, nós temos com a professora Nádia Hermann a conferência Experiência, Estética, Corporeidade e Ética. Então, a programação está disponível na página do SUFIM. Gostaria de convidar a todos e a todas para que acompanhem essas palestras, acompanhem as sessões de comunicações, e ficaremos todos muito contentes em poder continuar essa conversa e essas discussões que nós começamos hoje com o professor Frederic Mathevet. E, mais uma vez, muito obrigado, professor. Passo a palavra para o professor Raimundo, né, caso ele queira também fazer algum agradecimento. Enfim, muito obrigado mais uma vez, professor.
Merci, Frederic. Obrigado.
Merci a vous. Obrigado.
Professor Mário. Como o professor Mário falou, teremos esse evento durante todo o mês. Será um prazer sempre contar com vocês participando dessa discussão. Todas as falas ficarão gravadas no canal e poderão também ser acessadas em um outro momento. E assim damos por encerrado hoje a nossa primeira conferência do quarto simpósio Estética e Filosofia da Música, Estéticas e Experiências Sonoras. Novamente, obrigado, professor Mário, pela contribuição e participação. E merci, Frédéric.
Merci à vous. Merci beaucoup de votre invitation.